This is Barry with Cruising Authority at cruisetalkshow.com, and I'm here with somewhat of a legend in the industry of journalism and writing, the author of many ocean liner books, including The Only Way to Cross and Liners to the Sun and Crossing and Cruising. And he's had many books that he's published, and in fact, he's got a new book that's coming out about the France and the Norway. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome Mr. John Maxtone-Graham.
It's a great pleasure to be here with you again, Barry. You've just come off the Epic, and I should have been there myself, but I'm getting on the Queen Mary 2 in 2 days, and I've just got too much on my plate. But never too much to talk about my new book, published by Norton, which is coming out this November. And it's a double ship. France became the Norway. She had 12 years on the North Atlantic as a liner. Then she was laid up because the crew mutinied, tried to seize the ship. The French line withdrew her, put her in a backwater of Le Havre, and she stayed there as a prisoner, moored with no future at all except the scrapyard. And then 5 years later, Knut Kloster, who was the head of NCL, and founded the Miami cruise industry with NCL, then decided he needed a fifth ship. So he bought the France, unheard of, to mix a huge liner with four 20,000-ton ships. Incredible. People thought he was mad, but he knew what he was doing. And the Norway entered service in June of 1980 and sailed more than twice as long as she had as the France, and introduced a whole new class of passenger to the same ship. And writing the book meant that I had to have two ships on the cover, but my editor gracefully, I thought, I hope we could sell it upstairs, decided to put one ship on the front cover, another ship on the back. So there'll be France and Norway, and I got Donald Stoltenberg, the great maritime artist, to do two wonderful postmodernist images of France and Norway. She ended her life catastrophically, unfortunately. There was a boiler explosion in 2003 alongside in Miami, in between cruises. A boiler exploded. The company had neglected the boiler room at the expense of the hotel side, and the boilers were immensely tall, 30 feet tall, so they projected up into crew country. And that boiler explosion killed 8 crewmen, horrifically. So they could never sail the ship again. No crew would sign on, and if one boiler had gone, another one could. Powering up the ship was like starting a time bomb. So she was towed out of Miami and went to finally ended up in Alang on the subcontinent of India, just south of Mumbai, where she was cut up. It's interesting, I have a little keychain that had a Norway and France. I had it engraved on both sides, a little gold model, and I had it in my suitcase. And when I opened the suitcase, the model, after 30 years, had become detached from the chain. Luckily, I wasn't wearing it, I've lost it. But it happened on the day that Norway went to Alang. And I thought, this is too eerie. I've got to write a book about this ship. So
what are some interesting, what's an example of something you've written in the book about France, for example?
Well, about France, she was a de Gaulle production. Yvonne de Gaulle christened her. And they tell me, although I don't have it authenticated, that the bottle didn't break the first time, but it did the second time. And when she went down the ways, there's what's called a riding crew on board the ship. And one man was not waving to his mother and father, which most of them, they leaned over the railing and waved at their parent. One man stood at the bow, locked in a salute to the general. And it stayed there as the ship went down the ways and was launched. And I thought it gave a wonderful sense of promise of what that ship was going to deliver. One of the remarkable things about France was that she had no extra tariff restaurant. There was no extra place where you could order a special meal. The French line decided their 400 first-class passengers would all have the best food possible, and they all did. So there was no way, you had to eat in the dining room. There was nowhere else to eat. There was no, you know, whatever they call these things, where you have breakfast or lunch up in another restaurant. There was no such thing. You had to go to the same restaurant every time. And so they did. And the food was exquisite. And Craig Claiborne, who was a great New York Times food critic, came on board the France when she first arrived in New York after a dreadful maiden voyage. It was February. No ships ever sailed on a maiden voyage in February. But for some reason, because of the timing, they decided to bring her over in February. She had a brutal crossing, and Claiborne came on for lunch and complained in the Times the next day about the bad food, that it wasn't up to standard. And he would change his mind. He became a great France aficionado. But that was a terrible jolt to the French line and the France when the first review in New York by an extremely important critic, national critic. Craig Claiborne was the sort of enfant terrible of the 60s in terms of food and taste.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing your new book come out. I know a lot of our listeners and people that watch this video are really looking forward to it. So when is it released?
It will be released in November, and I'm pleased to say it's a little less expensive than the Normandy book, which you may recall was $100 if you bought it in a shop. This one's only $75. I never thought I'd say only $75 about a book, but it's nice that it's a little less expensive. It's the same format, the same size, also printed in Italy, so I think it'll be a wonderful production. And I'm just this moment, my wife Mary is doing the index and coming to me with mistakes that she's found, typos in the text that I missed, but that's what indexes do. So it'll be ready in November, and I'm giving 2 lectures at the Metropolitan Museum, one about France, one about Norway. I'm not happy that they're calling the lecture series Dames at Sea, but there you are, you can't battle the publicity.